on giving, doesn't it? So, next we have Dr. Kesar Sadhra. He is a GP principal and senior partner based in Slough. He's been a diabetes lead since 1989 and looks after a 90% South Asian patient population with a diabetes prevalence of 11%. Dr. Sadhra approaches diabetes by tackling lifestyle and diet in an individually and culturally sensitive manner. He works with his patient population, achieving great results, which he's now going to share with us.
Thank you very much. Diabetes type 2, Asians. First, let's consider the size of the problem. 4% of the UK population are South Asians, but they account for 8% of the diabetes type 2. 6 times more likely in South Asians than Europeans, and a higher risk of CVD and other morbidities. Why? People go on and say it's genetics, it might be central obesity, fat metabolism in musculoskeletal areas, but the underlying cause, I believe, is fundamentally lifestyle. In our practice, 10,500 patients, 90% South Asians, just over 8,000 of them are adults, and that accounts for 1,240 plus type 2 diabetics. 558 as of the beginning of this week were pre-diabetic, and that includes history of gestational diabetes but no formal diagnosis of diabetes after that. Hence, total, out of the 8,000, 1,800 are type 2 diabetics or pre-diabetic. So, 12% of the total population, 15+% of the adult population, but if you include pre-diabetics, 22% of that population have got impaired glucose tolerance one way or the other. And if you look at the older people, over 65, that approaches to 50 to 60%. And on the right is the various charts demonstrating it. Why is it so important? Everybody knows. The morbidity, the complications, heart, eyes, kidneys, stroke, and blindness. Okay. The other thing, economy to the country. Since 2007, diabetes medication has been the highest cost. And as of a couple of years ago, it was contributing to 11.4% of the total primary care cost, just over 8.8 thousand million. What's achievable? Previously considered to be irreversible, chronic, gradually deteriorating, but there's hope, there is remission possible, and that's been demonstrated in a few of the popular studies. Diabetes.co.uk with the low carb program, digital program, 26% remission in the first 12 months. The USA Barter program, 60% remission with a ketogenic diet. And Newcastle low calorie diet, 46% in the first year, dropping off to about 36% in the second year. How can we get results? Okay, getting the results. I've been in general practice 30 years looking after the type 2 diabetics, and as I said, just over 1,200 type 2 diabetics, mainly South Asians. I did an audit on what I started doing, which is low carb approach to our population on an individual basis. Did an audit of 150 patients back in 2010 to 12, and then 290 patients in 2014. What is achievable, and I'll just show you the graphs a little bit later on. What is actually achievable? We can look at patient-related achievements, practice-related, CCG related and national related. And these are the targets that we can aspire to. HbA1c reductions, reduced complications, reduced hospital admissions, weight loss, lipid profiles being improved, lower cost, and finally, remission. Patient related. This was back in 2010 to 12. We were achieving HbA1c reductions of over 60 millimoles in certain patients just on lifestyle dietary intervention. 2014, over 290 patients, achievements of over 100 millimoles of HbA1c just on lifestyle and dietary intervention. This was put up by David Unwin on Twitter, 116 millimoles reduction within 4 months in an Asian female who was actually on medications. The medications reduced. A participant in the audience, Kathy, has managed to beat that since, I think. At the same time, lipid profile improving, total cholesterol plummeting down, triglycerides plummeting down, HDL going up, and the lesser important LDL also dropping in that particular case, but that doesn't happen all the time. Weight loss, reduction, cholesterol we've mentioned, HbA1c drop. This is a new patient back in 2013. HbA1c on diagnosis, 111. Decided to change simple foods in the morning, lunch, and in the evening. Within 4 months, his HbA1c was down to below 40, and he's maintained it since. This is true remission. Another case, 12 years of diabetes, going up to 3 sets of medications, not listening to me for the first few years, but then saw the light and then decided to change his diet, cutting out carbs and maintaining that. And his HbA1c dropped to below 40, and he came off all 3 sets of medications. But the wonderful thing was, at that time, I repeated his GTT. GTT baseline fasting was 5 millimoles, and after 2 hours, 5.4. That is actual true cure. However, I can't say cure, because as time goes on, if he starts misbehaving, as was shown in the last upward spike, I think he celebrated when I told him that he went away and started eating sweets and champagne and everything like that. Anyway, right, practice related. Year on year, our practice used to be one of the top performers on targets as well as spend. Lowest spend, one of the highest achievements for HbA1c regularly in our locality. CCG related, again, one of the lowest diabetes related admissions and complications year on year. Prescribing for the CCG, one of the lowest prescribers, if not the lowest prescriber, but on a national comparison, we were 33% cheaper than the national average from 2012 upwards. That's per diabetic patient. And what they looked at was diabetic medications, insulin, and blood glucose monitoring strips. If you just look at the insulin part of it, we were 66% cheaper than the national average per diabetic patient. 66% savings, and that's from 2012 onwards. Nationally, if you extrapolate all this would equate to over £320 million saving for the NHS if it was looked at nationally. It is 10% of my practice's prescribing budget. David Unwin, he does the same, and he's demonstrated it year on year as well. How? I started off back in the mid 200s, the 2000s, so about 2003 to 5, started looking at what was happening with blood sugar with various foods that the population, the individuals were eating. I was focusing more on the low GI, but that led me on to just the carbohydrate content. And since about 2008, I started promoting low carbs within our population. What I found was that Asians have got an incredibly high carbohydrate content intake. Whether it's at breakfast, at lunch, on the evenings, or the snacks, or whenever, they regularly put a few spoonfuls of sugar in their tea when they're doing it for the whole family or for the guests. They don't actually leave the sugar out. They make the big pot, put it in there and brew it up and then present it. That was what was used to be happening. But anyway, I looked at the foods that had the high sugar content, carbohydrate content, looked at the juices and the drinks, and I focused on lighter meals in the evening, and I'll show you the reason why. 30 minutes postprandial walk, and I'll show you what happens with that. And more recently, over the last few years, intermittent fasting. That was the basic principle for what I do in practice. My consultations focus very quickly on their diet, suggest alternative foods to what they're having, so it's very much an individual-based approach. I show them pictures of various foods and diets and profiles to encourage them to change, and I emphasize the nighttime profile with the various foods because they end up having, or used to have, the bigger meals in the evening when everybody's together or they come home from work, etc. And the bigger meals also was where the majority of the carbohydrates were ingested. And then they would sit down and go to sleep. I encourage exercise, but I say exercise can be two forms. One is if you're going to get fit and bigger, physically, or whether you want to control your sugar. And if you're just focusing on maintaining your sugar, walking is as good as anything else. And 20 minutes of walking after their meals works wonders. Timing of the meals, bringing it forward early, not too late, because invariably they eat at 8, 9 o'clock and then go to sleep at about 10, 11 o'clock, but encouraging them to bring them forward always helps. I won't dwell too much on this, but the kind of foods that I focus on are all the flour-based foods listed down there: rice, potatoes, cereals, fruit, and juices. I go through that with every individual. Encourage them to change from vegetable oils, do the postprandial walking, lighter meals in the evening, and then the other three things that everybody knows about that helps. Intermittent fasting every now and then, not necessarily regularly. Relaxation, whether they do yoga or relaxation exercises or just general meditation, and sleep and rest. I suggest that through to them. These are the options that I go for, but we won't get too bogged down with that. What are the tools that I use to convince them? I go for graphs, which I'll give you examples of, and tables, and pictures, food pictures, and also use the sugar content of various foods, and this is where Dr. David Unwin's infographics have been immensely useful. Let's look at examples. This is continuous blood sugar monitoring back from 2011. I used the machine, the Navigator, which was a precursor to the Libra at the moment. And the difference between slices of toast and porridge, there isn't any. Same amount of carbohydrates, same sort of profile. So people used to come to me saying, I have porridge, that's much healthier, or I have Weetabix, that's a lot healthier. It isn't. Cornflakes, same sort of peak up to about 20 in this diabetic, as was the porridge. And these are the infographics that I've started using. Let's look at lunch. I've shown them this graph, which is one individual patient on successive days at lunch. First day having cheese, egg on toast. That's the top line. Then the next day he had cheese, ham sandwich, but this time it was bread with soya and linseed, which has got a lot lower carbohydrate content and a lower GI. And the last one was tuna salad. And I say, which one do you want to do? Would you prefer? So it's a visual way of tempting them on changing their thoughts. More recently, everybody wants bread. It's one of those addictive things, that satisfaction. So it's always very difficult to find a solution until recently I started making almond flour bread. Very easy to make. You can't get it from the superstores. But normal slice of bread will have at least 3 to 4 spoonfuls of sugar in each slice. Almond bread will have less than half, even a quarter spoonful of sugar. It helps. The other thing about Asians is chapatis. You know, they for some reason cannot survive. I can't survive it. You know, so I tell them 90% of the world population don't have chapatis, and they still survive. I suggested changing the flour originally, having a mix of soya or chickpea flour along with wheat flour, just to get the texture right. It improved the profile, but more recently I've started encouraging them to use fiber flour. This is commercially available and was engineered by one of our colleagues who's a retired anaesthetist, Dr. Jerry Davis. And that contains about, or less than a third of the normal wheat flour content of carbohydrates. It's 16 grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams of flour. And I would say it's less than 2 spoonfuls of sugar in each chapati, roti, whereas the normal wheat flour will have anything between 5 to 7 spoonfuls of sugar. This is what happens when a diabetic is actually taking 2 chapatis, 2 rotis, along with their vegetable curry and their lentil dal curry. This particular patient had his blood sugar shooting up from 6 up to about 12 and maintained over 4 to 5 hours at night time. That was his profile. Next day, he had chapatis slightly differently with the mixed flour and no potatoes. And that's the blue line. That's the difference that it can make. And I use these to actually persuade individuals. If they miss out chapatis completely, just have chicken and another curry, it's more or less flat. And if they have minced lamb with the chapati, the actual peak is a lot less. And the reason is it's got protein and it's got fat. That helps to reduce the absorption, reduce the actual the peaking of the blood sugar. Rice. 100 grams of uncooked rice or 240 grams of cooked rice has about 80 grams of carbohydrates in them. And you can imagine what kind of peak that's going to cause to a diabetic blood sugar value. So when they ask me, what do I eat if I can't have chapatis? How am I going to survive? So I show them this picture and I say, tell me, do you think you can eat this? Actually, my mouth's watering. And they said, yeah, that's a bit too much for me. Actually, I won't eat so much. I said, well, this is how you start it. Chop it up, whatever you want to have salad-wise, into smaller pieces. It forms the base. It can take the place of rice. It can take the place of chapatis. On it, put whatever you like out of the curries. and you end up having a very colourful, very tasteful, warm yet cold, textured meatball. Is it ready for lunch? Okay, and you can have the vegetarian version as well. Other thing that the Asians tend to like and use is bitter gourd, gorilla. This can be had either slightly fried or in salad or as a curry itself. This gentleman ended up having 2 pita breads with their curries on the first day and the second day. And you can see the different profiles, but they peak up to about 14 millimoles for the blood sugar, and that's prolonged. However, if they add in bitter gourd, still have the pita breads and the carbohydrate content, that's the kind of profile that they can get. So it's a lot more helpful. So I encourage that. Then pastas. Everybody has pasta. It's supposed to be healthy, not so much carbs, isn't it? But that's what pasta does. This gentleman ended up peaking his blood sugar at about 20 with pasta and chicken. Everybody's favourite, pizza, Friday evening. Family goes out, friends goes out. What do you think happens? Superman, eat your heart out. Yeah. Up and away. Up till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, if you have it late. So, everybody know what paratha is? No? It's an even bigger helping of chapatis, but with stuff stuffed in there. You know? And the kind of things that they stuff it with is potatoes or meat. You know? Very, very filling. It sustains you. It's supposed to have, originally I think they brought it out back in Asia to actually start at the beginning of the day so that it carried on and sustained them for the full day. But these days they have the night time. Now, one paratha in the morning, in this gentleman produced this sort of profile, slightly raised, lasting for about 4 hours for blood sugar. But if you have it at night time, before you go to bed, it goes on and on and on until about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. This is the night effect of having high amount of carbohydrates. So you always discourage the carbohydrates at night time. Adding in protein and fat, natural fat. Top part is the paratha by itself, huge peak, but if you add in the meat, mince or fats, it reduces the profile and it prolongs it slowly. I go on to squashes and drinks. Juices are also included in it. This gentleman has had a renal transplant and his control was immaculate up till last summer. And I saw him and his HbA1c had shot up from about 45, 50 up to about 100. And I asked him, what the hell have you been doing? And he said, nothing, sir. Except, the only thing is, it's been very hot and I've been having Vimto diluted every day. And that's basically it. Vimto, he stopped that, within a few weeks it was, coming down, the whole control, nothing more. Exercise. This is the profile with porridge. Just want to show you what the baseline would be without exercise. And Weetabix is the same sort of thing. But this gentleman walked for about 20 minutes, half an hour, after his breakfast, his Weetabix. And you can see the sudden drop in his blood sugar profile. Later on, he was such a nice person, he did the vacuuming at home while his wife sat down. And again, it's improved. Then he did the shoveling the next day, snow outside. Activity-wise, that's what happens. It drops down. Okay, what about lunchtime, the younger person? This gentleman had a healthy lunch, full of carbs, diabetic, and his blood sugar shot up from just about 9 up to about 16, and it went on for a few hours. Next day, or next weekend, it was on a Saturday, I asked him to go for a walk after his healthy lunch. That's his profile. 1.5 hours of walking. I asked him to walk for half an hour, and he got carried away. But it did the trick. And everybody does this, with the green, amber and red signs. I've got a list of all the foods that generally people have, and I suggest go for the greens, cut out the amber and the reds. And I encourage them to go on to the digital program, the low carb program, if they want to, because you can get personalization recommendations on that. I always ask them, the new patients particularly, I said, which one would you have? And the majority of them say the left, salad. There was one who said, no, I'll have the right one. I said, why? He said, because it's easy and quick. And that highlights the big problem that we have. Convenience, time, ease. Right. There are a few observations that I noted while I was looking at this. And it's easier to advise and bring people on board if they're self-motivated, educated, health conscious, and computer literate. It is easier. However, that's not the majority. The majority are poorly motivated. They're not that educated on this dietary measures. They're not particularly health conscious, and they're not, because they're elderly Asians, they're not computer literate either. And others are socially very, very busy. So it's difficult with them. The other thing that they have is conflicting advice, and that's been the bane of my life on this. They used to have conflicting advice from the diabetic center, conflicting advice on the guidelines, conflicting advice on the media. And the only way you can do that is by building trust. So that's where you as a GP or a medical professional can actually build that trust with them, and then they will start listening to you. Being available, so if there's any queries, they can ask, and that means over the telephone. That might be every second week at the beginning. Patients understanding and appreciating the importance of this. Patients accepting the lifestyle changes and being compliant with the dietary advice and the medications. And cultural peers, family pressures saying, oh, go and have a little bit of this. It's not going to cause you any harm, Instead of 3, have 2, that sort of stuff. But that can only be overcome if you educate them in their own language, in a culturally sensitive way, and talk to them at their level. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling. And the educational tools that people use, obviously, around the last few years, there've been much more from the English version. The Asian element has not been there. But I think the kind of tools that I've got developed helps, so they can relate to them. And the other thing is that I go out for talks out into the community, so that everybody knows, whether it's the parents on one side or the children on this side, they can exert pressure onto the patient. The food choices, you can quite easily say, like the guidelines often do and the pharmaceutical people, you can't use this medicine, you can't use that medicine, but they never come out with alternatives, So you can always tell them, don't eat this, don't eat that, but you need to give them alternatives. And the alternatives, I call it the 5 Ps. They've got to be appealing. They've got to be practical for everybody. They've got to be palatable, and they've got to be acceptable. There's no point in giving a vegan a meat dish, etc., etc. You know what I mean? Maintaining momentum. I've got 2 minutes, please. Maintaining momentum. You need to see them regularly. You need to be accessible to them if you want them to change. It's like saying, stop alcohol and we'll see you again in 12 months' time, and they can get carried away in between. It's not going to work. So the follow-up needs to be regular and tailored to maintain the drive and the compliance. Time and funding, very difficult in a big practice like that. So this is where you've got to entertain group consultations, and community talks in order to get the message across. Despite all this, a proportion will always struggle or not cooperate. So this is the kind of, this is an add-on to what was said earlier on. Cirrhosis, you avoid alcohol. COPD, you avoid smoking. Asthma, you avoid the allergen. Peptic ulcers, you avoid NSAIDs. Allergic reactions, you avoid allergens. Why the hell can't we avoid carbohydrates? Okay, so it's got to be the first option. But with lifestyle changes, the other things that I did mention, you can get results. At this moment in time, I think I've got well over 100 patients who are actually in remission, proper remission, without any medications, and have been so for the last few years. But it's hard work. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jo, and I'd like to just go back to some of the slides you said at the beginning, where you were looking at your practice results compared to other practice results across the CCG, and I'm wondering, with such great results, why your neighbouring colleagues and practices haven't adopted your methods.
Well, I can refer you to the talk, I think at the beginning, which was from Asim, and there was also highlighted the last talk from the previous speaker. There's a lot going on in the background, and two of the most influential categories in society is the pharmaceutical company and the nutritional company, and they sponsor a lot of talks, guidelines and sessions, and then there are colleagues who are in influential positions who might not, who actually promote that side of it. I think that sort of thing does go on. And even though a majority of my colleagues at my level actually do promote low carbs in their practice, it is not something that is set in guidelines, and I've struggled with that, which is a bit of a shame. It looks as if people at a distance tend to listen to you more than the people who are next door. I don't know, I can't answer that, but I've given you the gist of what happens.
We're eating into lunchtime. Any final questions? We're right at the back.
Thank you very much for a very informative talk. The question I had was regarding weight loss in patients. So once they go on this low carbohydrate diet, are there any concerns about how rapidly they might be losing weight? And are there any complications from rapid weight loss which we should be monitoring in such patients?
Right. My personal feeling is that weight loss, there are two or three, actually there's 4 ways of doing it. Bariatric surgery, low calorie, low carb, and intermittent fasting. Across the board, they are all low carb. Bariatric surgery, because it reduces the quantity that you're eating, the proportion of carbohydrates plummets. Low calorie, same principle. The calories have gone down, the food content's gone down, and the carb content has actually gone down. Low carb, well, we're transparent, we say what we do. And intermittent fasting, apart from the metabolic changes, it's low carb proportion as well. But in answer to your question, no, I have not had any issues. The reason being that I don't focus on cutting down calories. They have a good meal. It's just that they don't have that many carbs. And as a result of that, they maintain their nutrition. They do not pine for food with a rolling stomach every day, you know, and it's sustainable. That's the one thing compared. This approach is sustainable out of all four, much more sustainable. And the other thing is that low carbs, a misnomer. Out of the 3 macronutrients, low carbohydrates are the only ones that are not essential to life. You can survive without any carbs. The second thing is, and this is another confusion that people have, fiber. We're talking about digestible carbs, not carbohydrates across the board. So fiber is not included in this sort of discussion. Does that answer your question?
I think we'll break for lunch now. That was amazing. Thank you so much. This is definitely